Hello everyone. Today we're going to learn about metric conversions, when to take grams and convert it to kilograms or milligrams, or if you have liters or meters. We're going to look at how to move the decimal. So in here, a very important concept that you need to understand is that every number in life has a unit. Your age has a unit called years. Money has units. Everything has a unit out there. Whether you write it on paper or not, it does have a unit. So as you see here, 61.2 kilograms, we're going to look at how to take grams and convert them, how to actually write the symbols. Is it capital versus lowercase? So in here, there are two types of units called base units and prefixes with base units. So there are a couple base units we're going to start out with. One of them is grams. But when do you have something called like maybe kilograms or centigrams? Well, centi is what's called a prefix. So a prefix means it's a name before the name. So prefix, centi, and then the base unit is grams, so centigrams. So as you see, these are the base units that we're going to be using in this video. So grams, liters, seconds, and meters. And that represents units when you're talking about mass, volume, time, and length. Could we use minutes or hours? Yes, we could, but we're just going to start with seconds because seconds is the SI unit for time. Volume, the SI unit for it is liters, and you see for liters, I did it on purpose. The name, liters, is capitalized, the unit is capitalized. Most units are usually lowercase, but if it is capitalized, it has to be capitalized. And these are some common prefix names. I'm sure you've probably heard of some of them, like kilo and centi and milli. Some of them you may not be familiar with, and this is what they call the multiplier. And basically, every time you change from one prefix to another, it changes by a factor of 10. So when I go from centi to milli, that changes by a factor of 10. Or if I go from kilo to hecto, that changes by a factor of 10. But every time I move a factor, it always changes by 10. So I could have some of these that change by 100 or 1,000 or 10,000. It just depends on how many times you move the decimal. So with these are the actual units we're going to be using. In chemistry, I don't really deal too much with tera or femto, even pico, very rarely. I usually stick from giga all the way to nano, okay? So in here, let's just practice how to write some units first and how to write the names, what they actually mean. So cm, and when you have two symbols versus one, okay? So if it only has one symbol, that means it's a base unit. And there's a letter that's going to get very tricky. It's that letter M, the little m. But if you actually have two letters in it, then that means you have a prefix plus the base unit. Okay? So if I have cm, well, I know that m is at the very end, and that m means that's meters. Okay? And little c, that means centi. And it is one word. Okay, so centimeters. But what if I have m by itself? Well, if you look back on our chart, well, I got little m here for milli, and I also have big M, and I got a little m over here for meters. So remember what we said, if you have one unit by itself, that cannot be a prefix because it's the name before the name. And you don't have a name before the name. So you have just little m, which means that's meters. Okay? mm, well now we definitely have meters right there because the base unit is always the end of the name. But now what about this little m? So if you go back to our chart, the only prefix that has a little m is right there, milli. So millimeters. Okay? We already know capital L, that is liters. Okay? But what if I have dA and then capital L? Well, I already know that the ending of it, that is base units, so that is liters. But what is dA? So if we go to our chart, dA, and unfortunately on this one it's not on here, but dA happens usually right here, and it's called deca. Okay? And I'll get to, I have a chart that's coming up that actually has all of them on here. This is a chart that I got from our book. Deca is DA, but be very careful with deci that has an I. That's just little d, okay? And deci actually is a factor of 10, okay? So right here, I have deca and then liters, okay? Now, if I have little m and capital L, well, I already know I have liters. But before you're thinking that's meters, you got to remember it can't be meters because a base unit is the unit at the end. So that can't be meters, liters. Okay, it just sounds kind of funky even saying it. But that right there, that's a prefix. So that M, that's milliliters. Little g by itself, do not get it confused with capital G because capital G is a prefix. That's giga. So little g, that is grams. Okay? And I have kg, and I know that g at the end, that's a base unit, so that's grams. And then little k, okay, so as you see in our chart, the only little k we have is kilo. So that is kilograms, okay? And the k is not capitalized because we do have a k that's capitalized in chemistry called Kelvin, but kilo is little k. dg, well, I know I have grams. But the question is that D, is that deca, or is that deci? So if I look at my chart, the only one that has little d, that is deci. Okay? And little s is seconds. Okay? I've seen students do an abbreviation for seconds as SEC, and that actually is wrong because in chemistry, the unit for seconds, its abbreviation is actually little s. So you probably may have seen like SEC with a period as abbreviation out there in the world. That's just how other places abbreviate it, but in chemistry it's actually just little s. And we have ms, which that little s right there is seconds. Question is that m in the front, is that milliseconds, or is that megaseconds, or is that meters seconds? Well, we know we can't debate that last one, because you can't have two base units in an actual abbreviation. So that little m, and it's little m, so that means it's milliseconds. Okay? So that right there is just to help you understand if you see units, what is the actual name of it? Because in chemistry, we abbreviate everything we can. So in here, this is a chart that I teach my students on how to move the decimal. But you have to remember, every time you move in a decimal, it changes by a factor of 10. So right here, I put base units in the middle, and I put my units in the back, and these are prefixes on this side of the box, and we have prefixes on this side of the box. So every time I go from one box to another, that changes by a factor of 10. And if I go to another box, that's another factor of 10. And another box, same thing, same thing. So if I actually went from like meters all the way to kilometers, well, I have not changed by 30. It's not 10 times 3, it's 10 times 10 times 10. So I changed by a factor of 1,000. So I'm going to teach you both ways, converting by using a decimal and converting by what's using a multiplier. And for those of you that have ever done conversions in chemistry, it's basically I'm setting up a conversion, okay? But then you got to recognize some other things. We got these empty boxes. Now there's actual units here. Don't know who those units are. It doesn't really matter to me who they are because I've never probably in 20 years of chemistry ever talked about who those units are. But there are actual units there. So when you move the decimal, you have to count these boxes too. And same thing over here. Don't know who those units are, but they do count. So over here, you see some boxes. And the cool trick is when I teach this to my students, you have the same amount of boxes in the same spots on both sides. So I have 3 units, and then space, space, a unit, space, space, and a unit. Same thing over here, okay? So these prefixes, these represent big numbers. So I'm sure you've heard of mega millions out there, like for the lottery. Mega means a million because it's a big number. But prefixes over here, these mean little numbers. Okay, I'm sure you've heard of micro out there. Micro means something times 10 to the negative 6. So basically it's 0.5 zeros and then a 1 at the end. It's a very, very small number. Or nano, If you've ever heard like nanotechnology, very small, so times 10 to the negative 9. And I don't really concentrate too much on about the multipliers because to me moving the decimal is much easier. But I'm going to teach you both ways so that way you get the hang of it. So in the screens coming, I'm going to keep my little trend up there, my little helpful box, so that way you can see how I move the decimal. But when you're doing this, you really need to make sure that you remember the order of it, okay? So I do a little trick with my students on how to remember the order of it, and it's kind of a little cheesy, but it works, okay? So for giga, I call it giant, because giga means giant's a big number. You're talking about something 10 to the power of 9. And mega, I call mighty. And the reason why I teach them these tricks is because I don't give them this box. I don't give them any helpful anything on a test or quiz or even an AP test. They expect you to be able to do this. So that way, if they get in trouble, they're like, okay, how many spots is it from kilograms to centigrams? They just write this little quick little thing, and it helps them a lot. So giant, mighty, and then for little k, I call it king. Little h is hecto, so I call it Henry. You can call it Hector. I like that even more. Let's call it Hector. And then DA. Now, I'd be very careful with the DA versus D, because with this A, I always remind myself the word drank, because the word drank has a D and an A in it. Okay? And right here, what did King Henry drink? Or King Hector drink? Or Harriet? Okay? Whatever H name you want to come up with. So I like to call meters, I call it milk. And for capital L, I call it lemonade. And for G, I call this Gatorade for grams. And for S, I call it soda. Okay? So giant, mighty King Hector drank, and he drank whatever he drank. And then what did he drink? Okay? Either milk, lemonade, Gatorade, or soda. So now I get to this D. Okay, so this D on this side is during. Okay. And little c, I call it Christmas. And then little m, morning. Okay. So giant, mighty King Henry drank, and whatever he drank during Christmas morning. Then I got the last two. Okay. Now micro has a funny little symbol to it. It looks like a U, but it has a long stem in the front. So it's a long stem. So I call this word, I call it the word until. Because then it reminds me of this U type of symbol in its prefix. And then until, nano, I call it noon. Oops, I'm out of room. Okay. So giant, mighty King Henry drank, whatever he drank, during Christmas morning until noon. Okay. So let me show you how to move the decimal. So I kept my box up here on the top, and I have these two examples, and we'll do a couple more at the end. So 5,000 meters, and I want to know how many millimeters. So when I teach my students this, I tell them, look, you got to use your hands, okay? Put one hand on one unit and put another hand at the other. So if you put your fingers on one of these boxes and the other hand, the other finger on the other. So if I have 5,000 meters, so that's a little m. That means I'm starting right here in the base unit box. And I'm going to millimeters. And milli is right over here. Okay? So if I'm starting here, and I'm moving the decimal, and I don't have any decimal to start with. So anytime you have a number that doesn't have a decimal, you start your decimal at the end. And I'm going to start here, and I'm going to move 1, 2, 3, and I'm moving 3 spots to the right. So I'm going to start this decimal and go 1, 2, 3. And in between these waves, you're going to add zeros. So 5,000 meters just became 5 and 6 zeros millimeters. Now, I don't ever have my students write numbers this big. We do scientific notation. So really what you have is 5 million. Okay, and you can add the commas if you want. And then I have that decimal. Well, if I want to put this in scientific notation, I'm just basically going to start my decimal where I left off. And now, this is where it gets confusing. When you do scientific notation, you have to have this number move the decimal until you hit a number between 1 and 9. So I'm going to move this decimal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And I just move it in between every one of those zeros. And I'm going to hit this number 5 at 6 places, and I moved it to the left, which means my exponent will be positive. But now the tricky part, the two evil words called sig figs. How many sig figs? Whatever number you started with when you're moving the decimal converting is the amount of sig figs that you end with. So if I only had one sig fig, those zeros don't count because there's no decimal, then my answer can only have one sig fig. We're not doing a calculation. We're just moving every decimal by a power of 10. 5 times 10, okay? If you want to do a conversion, okay, I'm going to show you that way also. 5,000 meters. And when you do a conversion, I have a video that you can watch on how to set up conversions. You draw an X in a line. The units that you want to get rid of go on the bottom of the conversion, and the unit that you want to get to goes on top. So millimeters is abbreviated meters, okay? So now what goes on top and bottom? Well, remember, if I had 1 meter and I move this decimal 1, 2, and 3, well, that means I have 3 zeros. So 10 to the third, that's 1,000. So 1 meter is 1,000 millimeters. So you can put that conversion here. So 1 meter is 1,000 millimeters. My meters cancel. I plug it in. You get the same answer. To me, it's very easy moving a decimal, especially when time is like crunching on you. You got a test or quiz or AP test. Whatever way works, as long as you get the right answer. Okay? 67 centimeters and how many meters? So I have 67 cm, and I'm going to little m. So where do I start? Well, I'm going to start right here, a centi. Okay? And where am I going? I'm going to the box. Well, I can't just go straight there because I got to hit every box to get to meters. So I'm going to start at centi, and I'm going to go to the left. I'm going to go 1. Oops, sorry. I'm going to go 1 and then 2. So I moved my decimal 2 places. I don't have a decimal, so I'm going to start my decimal at the end, and I went 2 spots to the left. So 1 and 2. So that's where I'm going to end up. So I'm going to have 67. But is it 67.00, 67.0, just point, or just 67? I had 2 sig figs in the beginning. I need to keep 2 sig figs at the end. Okay? So you want to make sure that you keep the sig figs going. Let's just try a couple of these. If you want to pause the video and then check as you go, go ahead. Like I said, we have a couple examples in here. Okay, so I kept the boxes up here. So I have milligrams, so milli, I'm going to start right here, and I'm going to grams, which means I'm coming over here. So milli to grams, I'm going to move it 1, 2, 3. But I'm going to move it 3 places to the left. I don't have a decimal, so I'm going to start it at the end. So start right there and go 1, 2, 3. Question is, sig figs. In the beginning, I only had 1 sig fig in the beginning, so I need to keep 1 sig fig. So 100 milligrams is 0.1 grams. 20 centimeters, I'm starting right here, and I'm going to meters. So 20 centimeters, 1, 2. So I moved my decimal 2 places to the left. I don't have a decimal, so I'm going to start it at the end. And I had point, and then 1, oops, sorry, 0.1, 2. So I'm going to have 0.2. I originally started with 1 sig fig. I'm going to end with 1 sig fig. 50 liters going to kiloliters. So liters is right here in the box, and kilo is over here. So I'm going to start here and go 1, 2, 3. I only have 1 sig fig, so my answer needs to stay 1 sig fig. And I'm going to start my decimal at the end and go 1, 2, 3. Now in this little wave, I do have to add a 0. But I need to remind myself I only need 1 sig fig, so 0.05. Leading zeros do not count as sig figs. If I kept that 0 at the end, that 0 becomes significant because it's after the 5 and it contains a decimal. So you're going to want to make sure that you don't keep that 0 at the end. 22 grams going to centigrams. So I'm starting right here with grams, and I'm going to centi, and centi's right over here. So 1 and 2. So I moved 2 places to the right. I don't have a decimal, so I'm going to start at the end and go 1, 2. So my 22 just became 2200. Do I keep the decimal at the end? And no, I do not, because my answer 22 only had 2 sig figs. But what if you start with a prefix and go to another prefix? Okay, so if I have centimeters, cm, I'm going to start right here in centi, and I got to go all the way over here to kilo. Well, when you move your decimal each place, the box counts as a movement. So you're going to go all the way over here to kilo. So from centi, I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the left. Start my decimal at the end and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in between these little waves, I'm going to put those zeros. Those zeros do not count as sig figs because they're not significant because they're leading zeros. And kilograms going to grams. So I got my kilo right here, and I'm going to go to grams. It's right here in the box. So 1, 2, 3. So 3 places to the right. I don't have a decimal. It started at the end. So I need to go 1, 2, 3. And I'm just going to fill these in with zeros. Okay. Now I had 2,350. So now I have 2350 and then 0 notation. So it looks like I have 2,350,000. So if you had to go in scientific notation, start where you left off on that decimal and move it back till you hit a number between 1 and 9. And I'm going to stop right there. So in scientific notation, I get 2.35. And remember with sig figs, I had 3 sig figs here. I need to keep the sig figs 3 over here. And I moved it 6 to the left, so it becomes times 10 to the 6. Let's try one more screen of moving the decimal. Milliliters to centi. Well, my milli is right here, and I'm basically just going 1 box over to centi. 1 box to the left, so I'm going to move that decimal at the end and just move it between the 1 and the 9. So 1.9. 52 kilometers to meters. So I'm going to start here in kilo and go 1, 2, 3 to meters. So 52. And I got to move 3 to the right, start my decimal at the end, and create these waves. Fill in those zeros in those waves. So 52 becomes 52,000 meters. I'm not going to keep my decimal at the end because then I'll make those zeros count. 36 meters to centimeters. So meters right here, and I'm going to go 1, 2 to centi, 2 places to the right. So 36 becomes 3,600. So start that decimal at the end and just move it 2 places. Don't keep the decimal because then you'll have 4 sig figs instead of 2. Centimeters to millimeters. So I got my centi right here, and I'm just going to go 1 spot over here to the right. And 18, start that then, becomes 180, but no decimal. 6 grams, how many milligrams? So I'm going to start my grams right here, and I'm going to go to milligrams. 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to move that decimal 3 places. 3 places to the right. I don't have a decimal, so we just started at the end. So my 6 grams becomes 6,000 grams. I want the 1 sig fig since I started with 1 sig fig. And if I go the other way, milligrams to grams, 1, 2, and 3. And from milligrams to grams, I went 3 places to the left. Start my decimal at the end, 9. Okay. Let me just throw you one example right over here. We'll just call it example M. What if you had to go all the way to like mega or giga or micro or nano? Okay, so let's add 19 milligrams. And I want to go to micrograms. So remember micro is this long stem UG. So if I start right here, my 19 milligrams, I have to count these boxes. There's units there. We just not going to talk about them because I don't even know what units are there. But I do know that there are units there that are used in science or math, so I got to count them. So the 19, put my decimal at the end and count it. 1, 2, 3. Nothing complicated about it. Just don't forget where the boxes are. So my 19 milligrams just became now 19 grams. Same thing if I would have went to nano, I just keep moving that decimal till I hit nano, okay? Giga and mega, they are capitalized. So if you did have something like mega meters, you want to make sure that you have an emphasis on the capital versus the lowercase. Or giga meters, same thing. So the capital G with the little m, okay? Hopefully, ladies and gentlemen, this was helpful to you. If you need any extra help, there should be a couple more videos coming up with converting units. Thank you.